Good evening and welcome to the Village of Westmont special meeting being held today, Monday, January 25th, regarding the first presentation of the draft prepared by our consultants on the stormwater study that was ordered by this village board a number of months ago. I would like to ask our clerk to please take the roll call.
Mayor Ron?
Here.
The clerk's here. Trustee Emery? Here. Trustee Fleming?
Here.
Trustee Forsley?
Here.
Trustee Klebanow? Here. Trustee Scott?
Here.
Trustee Seneca? Here. Manager Searle?
Here.
Public Works Director May?
Here.
Public Works Supervisor Engineering Department Noriega?
Here.
Budget Analyst Parker?
Here.
Village Planner Malik? Here. Engineer Kim Nickel?
Here. Thank you. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As I mentioned, this is our the first draft presentation of the stormwater study, and the board, the village board, and myself are seeing this for the first time, as well as all of you that are in attendance this evening. We will not be taking any formal action. It will be just a presentation. I will have Steve May, our Public Works Director, give an introduction. After that, we will have Christopher Burke Engineering give their presentation. And after that, we will open the meeting for public comment. With that being said, Steve May, would you like to give the introduction, please?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to give a brief background of what brought us to today, starting with extraordinary weather events that occurred in the fall of 2008 and into the winter and spring of 2009. There was a lot of stormwater flooding issues that were happening in the village-wide, some of them reoccurring and other ones new. And there was a lot of public input as to the sharing the problems that were going on without the village and the individual places we were. With the rate of public comment that was coming in, the mayor arranged to hold a special public meeting, at which time we solicited everybody's comments to come in, and at that time there was also our engineering firm was in audience to get a grasp of what the scope of the type of complaints we were getting in order to help us formulate with an eye on wanting to do a village-wide, a comprehensive stormwater study. We have a lot of little individual improvements that we can address in-house or address by direct project, but a majority of the larger issues that we have left are very regional in nature, and they're comprehensive, and it's not just fixing a problem at any one point, or certainly not without aggravating it somewhere else. So taking a village-wide, comprehensive look at the stormwater management issue was, important to staff and us, and you all agreed at that time. So the engineering firm, Christopher Burke Engineering, was retained to do this look and to commission a study and to as part of that study, and Jerry will elaborate on that, but was a direct village-wide survey, both by the participants that already approached the village, as well as soliciting anybody who wanted to comment. There was paper and electronic versions of surveys that were available, and we went through a large data collection campaign. The information was collected, and with this bigger look, I'll just tell you from a staff's perspective, we're looking to get what I'll simply term as a comprehensive plan for stormwater management, because we've always approached each individual issue on a one-by-one basis, and as I already mentioned, they tend to be all interrelated. So with that, Jerry will get into their findings to date. You've had periodic updates, as has staff, on the survey process and the experiences that were going on while preparing the study and putting the model together and everything. But this is a first look at this presentation is a first look both for the village board and staff at some of the findings that have occurred. So it is termed a draft report because it is, and there is no direction to be taken tonight. But given the scope of the presentation and any questions that staff have or you all have, to give Jerry further direction on how to complete this study. We wanted to, when we went into the study process in the spring, the goal was to have some of this draft information back in December. That was the timeline when we started back in March and April. And that was to get some, what I didn't want to happen is have some useful, easy, I'll just call them relatively inexpensive solutions provided and have those occur too far after we've already started the budget process for the next fiscal year and then have to wait another year to get into that implementation. So we're looking for, at this time, any improvements that we could be considering or evaluating for the next budget, as well as, and as importantly, putting together a more comprehensive plan on how to address the total issue and over what kind of period of time. So there will be other meetings. We'll have to have bigger discussions on funding solutions and what scope of time period to expand this comprehensive plan into. So with that, like you, I'm eager to find out what some of this information is tonight, and I won't expand too much on that. I'll let Jerry. This is Jerry Robinson. You all know him, but from Chris Burke Engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jerry Robinson. I'm with Christopher Burke Engineering. I've been an engineer with Chris Burke Engineering for about 22 years and have about a total experience of about 24 years as a civil engineer, water resources engineer. We do these type of studies for a lot of different clients. I've done quite a bit of work in DuPage County. I've pretty much done work in DuPage County since 1987, when we had a fairly severe storm event at that time, and have pretty much worked in and out of DuPage nonstop since then. And we still have problems, obviously. And the goal of this study was to come up with something, as Steve said, that was comprehensive for not just a portion of the village, but for the entire village-wide. Again, the purpose of the meeting is pretty self-explanatory. This is a draft presentation. We do not anticipate that this will be the final word on the recommendations for the projects. We want to gather some feedback from the elected officials and from the public and make sure that we're headed in the right direction. Another thing that will be presented, at least in a broad brush view, is a summary of the questionnaires that were completed by all the residents of the village. This is kind of the order that the presentation is going to go in. The next item that we'll go through is describing the areas of flooding and some of the causes of the flooding based on what we've discovered, both from the residents' questionnaires and also based upon the computer modeling that we've performed to date. And then the remaining item is a discussion of the proposed solution for the areas that we've studied in detail. So first thing is an analysis of flooding. Just to give you some background, in September 13th, 14th of 2008, we had just about 6.1 inches of rainfall. The average for the entire month, long-term average for September, is only about 3.3 inches. So we had almost double that amount of rainfall in a 2-day period. The total rainfall for all of September was 9.9 inches. So a substantial amount, basically 3 times the normal precipitation in this area. When engineers talk about storm sewer sizing or detention pond sizing or project sizing in general in water resources, the yardstick that we typically use is what's the so-called 100-year event, it really doesn't mean that it happens once every 100 years. It's a 1% chance of annual occurrence. And that rainfall total is in DuPage County 7.6 inches in a 24-hour period. So over that 2-day period, you had 6 inches, 6.1 inches. You're well up there in that extreme storm category. Areas you may have read in the newspaper, areas to the north of you had more than the 6 inches. There were some areas around the O'Hare Airport that were in excess of 9 inches, and some areas even further north in Cook County that hit almost 12 inches. So it's always hard for an engineer. The rainfall that occurs, especially these large storms, it's not uniform over an entire area. There are highs and lows, and sometimes certain areas will see damage where other areas do not see damage. And then to continue on, the storm events that happened then later in the year in 2008 and then in early 2009 were not nearly as large as this 2008 event, but they still caused problems, primarily because they were occurring on essentially a frozen ground surface. And when that happens, the ground, it acts as if the entire area is a parking lot. And you really don't have a chance for the rainfall to seep into the ground at all. And so what you see is a 3 or 4 inch storm can cause problems in that frozen ground condition, as opposed to these much larger 6, 7 inch storms. So you have to take into account what time of year the storms occur, how fast the rain occurs, and then obviously the total amount. And in certain areas, storm sewered areas sometimes are more sensitive to how fast does the rain fall over what period of time, versus if it rains slowly, several inches all day, the sewer has enough capacity to take all of that runoff and convey it away safely. So it really does depend on the intensity and duration of the storms to size projects. And we look at all of those factors when we're coming up with recommended projects to help alleviate the flooding in the area. No big surprise, the September 2008 flooding was caused by excessive rainfall. Again, that 6 inches, 6.1 inches over that 2-day period was more than enough to cause problems through a pretty wide range of the village. Again, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had fairly high rainfall totals on a running average, and that continuous amount of runoff that has been received has led to high groundwater elevations through the area. And that is another thing that there were a few residents that filled out the questionnaire that noted they didn't really have flooding, but only because they have lots of sump pumps, and that sump pump runs almost continuously, especially once it starts raining, and it will run for an extended period after that period of time. Again, there have been some new construction and subdivisions. Detention storage is provided for those, but there has been some home expansion, large structures built that can aggravate the flooding that you see, because the footprint of the house is much larger than what was previously on a lot. And again, one of the things that we reviewed and looked through and verified is I think there have been some residents that have questioned, were things built properly? And we've looked at several of the areas that were specifically pointed out as possibly causing problems. And we have found, at least our conclusion is at this time, that they met the criteria that was in effect at the time of the construction. So we didn't find any subdivision or detention pond that was permitted that didn't provide the storage that was called for. You know, we surveyed some of the ponds in great detail, and they are built according to the code that was in effect at the time. The next thing I'd like to talk about is some of the what we call the commonly misunderstood facts about flooding. And one of the first things, we haven't heard it in this particular study, but we've certainly heard it in other areas that have a lot of detention ponds throughout the area, is that if you dig the pond deeper, that'll take care of the problem. And I've got a slide following this that shows why that will not help in this particular instance. Another issue, one of the things that we'll be recommending in certain areas is that properties be flood-proofed. In other words, essentially a wall be built around the house to keep water from coming in contact with the house. A lot of times, because of the limited space that you have available in the village, this is really the only cost-effective alternative to take care of a problem. But a lot of people's perception is that if you flood-proof the house, that will cause problems for adjacent properties or downstream properties. The idea of flood-proofing, when we talk about flood-proofing, it's limited to be within 10 feet of the existing footprint of the structure, and not to fill in the entire lot and make all the lot high and dry. That is not what we're talking about when we talk about flood-proofing. Another common thing, a lot of people say, well, let's just ship this problem downstream. And again, Westmont is kind of unique in that you really are in the top of the hill. A lot of your water goes into other communities, and you know, I don't know of any community that surrounds you that says, oh, we don't have any flooding problems at all, please send us all of your excess water. They're struggling with their problems just as much as you are. Another thing a lot of people perception is that because there's water standing in the streets during a flood event, that someone somewhere, we never know who and we've never found that person, is convinced that there is a valve or a gate or some type of structure that's located in the sewer that's stopping the flow of that water from going downstream. And basically what's happening is during these large storm events, there is so much water in the system everywhere that it appears that the water is standing still. But if you really looked inside the sewer itself, that water would be moving through the system at a pretty high rate of speed. But in the street system, it looks like the water's just standing there waiting to be to go into the system, and that there's no water motion at all. And again, somewhat related to that is stop the standing water in the street. A lot of people's perception is that the street should always be dry, that you should always have dry pavement. Most modern subdivisions, most municipal codes only require that the 10-year, not the 100-year, the 10-year storm, so that's a 10% chance of occurrence. So fairly frequent occurrence that you should see water standing in the street, that you only build your storm sewer system to convey that 10-year storm event. And that is a common standard pretty much throughout northeastern Illinois. There are exceptions to that if you have an area that is that doesn't really have a natural outlet, then you need to build either some method for the water to get through the system. But the idea is to use the street as excess capacity for the drainage system. And it really comes down to economics. If every community tried to build a 100-year storm sewer, there would be very few new subdivisions built, at least in northeastern Illinois. Another common misconception is that all we have to do to stop the streets from flooding is to put in more inlets. Again, typically the inlets, what we have found, at least in Westmont and in most communities, is that the inlets are adequate to take the drainage. It's the storm sewers themselves that just do not have sufficient capacity to convey all of the water that's coming to it and take the water away in a safe and efficient manner. So if you add more inlets, that just means the water just still sits there. It really doesn't do any good for that. Now, I will say there is one area where we're making a recommendation in the Oakwood subdivision, we'll get into that later, where we are calling for a change in the type of inlets, but not for additional inlets. The next item is what we call breaking watersheds. It would basically mean if, let's just take the water from this area and pipe it to somewhere else, and somewhere else that didn't necessarily have a flood problem. And that always has its own risks associated with that. And it's not something that is typically done in this instance. Another misunderstood thing is the influence of areas not hydraulically connected. What that means is typically a lot of people's perception is that they have a flooding problem because they've read somewhere or they talked to someone that a pond overflowed somewhere 2 miles away, and that must be why I had a problem with my system at my location. And typically, the system has to be fairly close in proximity for you to be having a problem. It's usually not miles away that's causing a problem for you. Not always, but almost always. It's usually that your problem is being caused by a fairly, at least in Westmont's instance, your problems are being caused by somewhere fairly close in proximity to you. It's not water coming from somewhere else that's causing a problem. And then I guess the last item, and this is more for the public officials, is that the other local, state, federal agencies have money to take care of the problem. And as you all know, everyone is pretty much as strapped for cash as you are. And we do have a slide in here at the end that talks about some of the funding alternatives that we've identified, and we'll go into much more detail in the final report. This next slide is kind of a graphic of why deeper ponds are not a good idea, or that just don't work. What we have here is an existing pond. I don't know if you can see my cursor because I know my laser pointer doesn't work on this. But you have an idealized existing square pond. At the bottom of that square pond is the way that the water goes out of it. That's typically the storm sewer. It drains into the river and is dewaters in that fashion. By digging it deeper, what you see is that water is just water that sits there. So unless you put in a pump, which is a very expensive alternative, you're not going to gain any additional storage by going deeper. And obviously, adding a pump has, not only are there upfront costs associated with that, but pumped storage is very expensive from an ongoing basis because you're always then on the hook to provide the electricity to pump that reservoir out. So going deeper in an existing pond is usually not something that can be done, because typically, if it could have been done, it would have been done in the initial design of the pond. as part of the project. So this next slide kind of goes over briefly some of the tools that we use to generate this report and the study. We've visited the sites. Personally, I have visited some of the sites. Other people on my staff have been out to look at that. We have retrieved a few high water marks reported by residents and the staff throughout the village. Another invaluable tool, because even though the study was fairly expensive, we still did not survey every storm sewer in the entire village. We really just had enough budget to study a subset of the storm sewers that are located within the village. And so the existing sewer atlas that you have was invaluable to kind of fill in the blanks for us and show us in general where the water is going through the system. Also, your GIS, we've retrieved your base GIS system mapping information and layering nomenclature such that when we give this data back to you, it'll be in a format that's compatible with your GIS. One of the things, and we'll go through this in the questionnaire, is that we've been able to tie in the questionnaires to the address so that when you click on an address, that individual questionnaire will come up for you, so that in the future, you won't have to be searching around trying to find, where's that data from the study. It'll be part of your GIS system. Again, DuPage County, we use their 2-foot topographic mapping as a supplement. This tells us where the water generally flows in a gross sense. And then that was verified with additional field survey that we performed. And then the flood questionnaires from all of the residents that filled them out. And also we had 4 regional stormwater meetings, each basin, each of the 4 major watersheds. We met with the residents and solicited additional input to the process so that we could make sure that we're hitting all of these areas. So the next thing I want to go into is a summary of the questionnaires that have been received from the residents. We received 142 individuals responded to the questionnaire total. Of that, 2 people reported no flooding. Not surprising that people that aren't having problems are not responding to it, but that's actually the fact that we got to is not unheard of. But I know even though we list the one person as not having flooding, their comment is that they were having groundwater problems with that. So they obviously had incentive to at least let us know that not everything was perfectly okay with what they're doing. And what you'll see here, these don't total to 142 because the way that we did the questionnaire is that people were encouraged to check off all of the different types of flooding. If it was overland flooding, in other words, flooding coming from someone else's house or from a general drainage area, or was it just water standing in their yard? Was it seepage or sump backup? Or the last category was a sanitary sewer backup. Now, you have 2 different sanitary districts in the village, and obviously we'll track that information and then provide that back to the 2 districts depending on whether they're in the Flag Creek or Downers Grove sanitary district. But those are the gross numbers for each of the questionnaires that were completed by residents. This map I apologize to the people looking at it, is really hard to look at, but the idea of this was more to identify if we could see clusters of areas that are having flood problems throughout the village. And what we're looking for is geographically, do we have a lot of lots identified? Do we have a lot of residents identifying, saying we have a problem with overland flooding in these areas? And just, this is in a little more detail, a little easier to look at. You can see all the individual lots that were identified in Oakwood as part of the identified overland damages. So that helps let us know these are the people that we need to be paying attention to, what's going on with the storm sewer or what's going on with the detention pond in that area and the flow that's going through the system. This is the same information at what we call Warwick, but along the 3400 block of Warwick. Again, just in a little more detail. I don't, the final report will have much more detailed summary of all these locations for you, but this was just to give you a feeling for the type of responses that we were getting from residents. And then we'll go through these slides fairly quickly. This is the overall yard flooding throughout the entire village. Again, north is to my right, or towards the right-hand side of the page. The village, just because of the way it's oriented, it's actually hard to fit in a normal north to the top of the page. Overall seepage, much less response in that. But again, some of these will be duplicate. Some people responded, yes, I have overland flooding, I have yard flooding, I have seepage, I have sanitary sewer backup, you name it, I've got it. And so they're going to each individual category, then they would be ID'd under that category as identifying as having a problem with that. And then sump backups in the final, and this is, broke this into two categories. And sump backup, which means a sump pump that's not tributary to a sanitary sewer, and then the sanitary sewer backup is the final breakdown. And again, you can kind of see that the sanitary is fairly well scattered. It's not, it's not like there's one neighborhood that's reporting a large problem with sanitary, which you kind of expect unless there's a sewer that's having a real problem that would be ID'd as part of that. So out of that, we identified and really confirmed, we kind of knew from the initial meeting in March from the residents, but we just confirmed Oakwood subdivision, mostly from just the sheer number of people that responded in that subdivision, and then the 300 and 400 block of Warwick. Again, now this list is not comprehensive. As we get into the more detailed, were other areas that we looked at as part of that. On the north branch of St. Joe, we had in the Liberty Park area, the 39 to 4,000 North Adams and Washington identified, and then the 0 to 100 North Roslyn area. In St. Joseph Creek proper, Doe Circle in the Deer Creek subdivision, and the 300 block of South Park, which is adjacent to 55th Street. And then in Flag Creek, we had a few people responding on 200 North Warwick. Again, a few people on 300 South Warwick, 200 East Dallas, which is in the vicinity of the detention basin at Richmond and Richmond, and some people along West 56th Place. So now we're going to go into kind of the existing conditions. We're going to go through each of the problem areas in a little more detail, kind of lay out what we have identified as the problem with the area, and then once we get through all of the existing conditions, then we'll go back with the proposed conditions and recommended solutions for that. The first The first existing condition area is the Oakwood subdivision. We had the largest number of respondents from that area. We had over 62 in total for that. But the main thing out of that is we really didn't have any complaints of water getting into the structure itself. Most of the complaints were standing water, either in the front or rear yard areas. Most of the rear yard areas are from either a poorly graded rear yard swale or where people have encroached upon the area with either swing sets or landscaping of some sort. And that leads to causing problems because it kind of pushes the water off onto the adjacent property. Or it can hold water either upstream of that area. The 300 to 400 Warwick area, concern about the new construction. The concern was is that when Naperville in Chicago was rebuilt, that somehow that caused a problem. So that was obviously a big focus on our study to verify that the plans were followed and that what was called for in the engineering plans was actually what was built in the ground. And then one of the interesting things that we discovered in looking at this, the 300 block of Warwick, the storm sewers actually travel to the north and continue on into the 400 block and then north to Traube and then Traube to the east. The surface drainage for that area actually drains back to the south, so back towards Naperville Road. So what happens is once the storm sewer has reached its capacity, then that water has nowhere to go except back to the south. But because it's fairly not well defined, it has a tough time making it there, and I think that's what we've seen is the water just kind of sits there instead of draining properly away from the area. And then on the 400 block of Warwick, we definitely have seen that there's a large depressional area pretty much in the center of the block that really doesn't have an outlet at all. Any water that drains into that area sits there until the storm sewers have sufficient capacity to take that water out of the system. And you can see if you go through that area, it's pretty obvious that the homes are set way back away from the street, where the street is kind of the lowest area and the water just collects and sits at that location. Adjacent area, Rosewood Court and Blackhawk Drive. There's an existing detention pond at the end of that cul-de-sac here. The concern is that it seems to be overflowing a large amount of time and causing problems. As you know, Blackhawk Drive has been reconstructed, and that has, in our opinion, taken care of, I think, a lot of the problem. But we still, in the solutions, we have some specific recommendations for that area. On to the 39 and 4,000 block of Washington and Adams. Again, this is the Liberty Park subdivision. This is located in the Westmont Surface Water Protection District. It's really outside of the limits, but it was included as part of your overall study because a lot of times areas that drain, parts of Westmont drain into this area, and then parts, you receive drainage from parts of their area. So, really, it's good that you've included these areas in part of your overall study because at some point you'll probably at least be, if not you, DuPage County will be working with you probably to work on these areas. Again, it's a series of depressional areas. The storm sewer system is easily overwhelmed throughout the area. And there are some detention ponds that have been constructed by the Surface Water Protection District, but they are undersized relative to the tributary area. In other words, there's just the area that drains into them is more than the pond can handle, and so basically the water just starts to pool outside of the limits of the detention pond. And, you know, I think that's, as evidenced by the pictures the residents have sent in from these areas, it's pretty clear that this has been an ongoing problem for some time. The 0 to 100 Rosalind, again, is a smaller depressional area. It's not quite as large as the one on Warwick. The storm sewers are slightly undersized for it. Part of the problem with Rosalind is it actually takes a very circuitous route. The water drains to the south and then back to the north, and then some of it splits off, and then it actually goes back to the south. So it's fairly interesting from a drainage perspective what has been done with that area. Cumner and Burlington, the reason this is, it's not really a problem area per se, but it's actually will be coming up as hopefully as a solution. We ID this as a depressional area, but it's a potential storage site. There's a vacant area located here on the corner. And then Downers Grove has expressed a willingness to possibly participate in the construction of a reservoir on this site. The next area is Grant and Chicago. Again, it's a depressional area. You'll kind of hear the same thing over and over again. There's a lot of small depressional areas that sit, at least in this area, is mostly at the intersection. The storm sewer is undersized relative to current standards, and so when too much water gets into the system, the water ponds at that location. And then this again, drains to another problem area that's located downstream at Washington and Chicago. And then at Washington and Chicago, it's really the same thing. You have a storm sewer capacity issue tied to a depressional area at this location. Deer Creek, the problems identified in this area were the overland flow route that kind of flows along the edge of the subdivision in this area. Hopefully you can see as I'm running the mouse up and down along that area, kind of back behind the homes but adjacent to the townhome development. Their detention is located here at the north part of the basin. The current overflow, back. The current overflow actually flows into an adjacent private property. One of the things that we're looking at is, would it make sense to overflow into a public right-of-way that exists rather than having it flow onto that private property. We have to check and make sure that that street, if we put the water there, that it doesn't cause more of a problem downstream. Park and 55th, this is the 300 South Park. It's a storm sewer surcharge and capacity issue. 55th Street, for those of you that don't know, is a DuPage County DOT jurisdiction. So the sewer that runs along that street is owned and maintained by them. So any work or anything that we would propose to do to that sewer, we'd have to coordinate with DUDOT before we could take any action with that. And again, it's unfortunately that area has a fairly large drainage area to it, and there's not much that we can do with that location. Oak and Quincy is another area, kind of a depressional area where water sits until the storm sewers have sufficient capacity. The railroad embankment is immediately adjacent to the site, and there's just not a lot of capacity in that area. 200 East Dallas and Richmond. Main problem identified, there are some homes that have problems. There's a main trunk sewer that runs along Dallas Avenue and then drains into the basin, the regional basin, and then also identified as a solution, but really you've already taken care of it. There was some problems with the berm to the north that the village has gone through and rebuilt that embankment to prevent that water from overflowing onto private property, and now it'll be directed properly onto the street at Richmond rather than flowing onto private property. And there's been some other changes with that area. 60th and Fairview, that's an area where there's been some homeowners that have complained that basically the overland flow route has been plugged up or blocked by some of the construction on the north side and is causing a problem for them. Richmond and Grant, again, depressional area with no natural outlet. The storm sewer capacity. This one, the storm sewer capacity is not too bad. It actually is very close to the 10-year capacity. But the main thing is that there's a very high groundwater table. And this is an intersection. If you've been out there, you can look at that intersection and there are inlets all over the place. So people have tried the theory that if we put a bunch of inlets in, that'll take care of this. And what we're seeing is that high groundwater at that location. We need to come up with a way to dewater that area and try and bring the groundwater back down to help give the sewers capacity so that they're running at their full capacity when the storm does occur. Washington and Norfolk, this is an area that was more sanitary sewer backups being caused when the storm sewers are surcharging. We looked at the area, and again, you'll see in our recommendations, we didn't find a real flood problem with this, so we're recommending to do some additional investigation of the sewers in that area just to make sure that something hasn't collapsed or that there's some other problem that we can't determine. 200 North Warwick is a storm sewer capacity issue. The storm sewer at this location is fairly large as it's traveling to the south, and it's draining a pretty good tributary area to that. So in the area where the residents, there were 2 or 3 residents in this area that had a problem, and it's because the sewer is surcharging due to a lack of capacity. 300 South Warwick, this is adjacent to the Public Works. There's some rear yard drainage problems, issues that have been identified, and so this was just an area that was ID'd by one of the residents in that area. West 56th Place, again, have a rear yard drainage issue. The water that travels to the south pools and collects, and it really doesn't have an easy way to get out of this system, and the public sewers are a fair distance away. So Hampton Avenue, again, this was an area identified as a groundwater problem, more so than an overbank flooding per se, and so we have it on, again, there's not much that the village as a municipal body can do other than provide some technical support and leading the individual property owners to help themselves essentially flood-proof and seal off their property from this groundwater. So now we'll get into some proposed solutions. The considerations, we should go through these. Everything that you see on these slides is what we feel would be permittable under the current DuPage County countywide stormwater and floodplain ordinance. And pretty much what that standard says is that you're not going to increase discharge to someone else downstream of you, and you're not going to cause problems. You're not going to dam up water and cause problems for someone upstream that used to drain into that area and the water can't get there anymore. So it really is kind of a common sense thing, is what is equitable to you. You know, you can't just send the water downstream to the receiving communities. Downers Grove, Clarendon Hills, et cetera, would not be too pleased to take all that water. And again, not only does it have to comply with the county regulations, but it has to comply with the state and federal regulations. One of the things that we do recommend in here is floodproofing of residential structures. We typically recommend that in areas where the drainage in the sewer system is so large that in order to build a pond large enough to mitigate for any ponding that occurs at that intersection or area, it would, you'd basically knock down all the homes plus some to try and mitigate that. So it's kind of a losing proposition from that perspective. So we'd recommend floodproofing of the structure to keep the water, you know, in the street, away from the structure, make sure that the home is high and dry, and that, you know, yes, there still would be water in the streets, but at least your property in and of itself, the house would not experience flooding. We looked at alternatives that involve both the existing stormwater facilities. Can we do something with those existing facilities? Can we make them bigger? Can we change the outlet structure? Can we sometimes making an outlet structure bigger is actually a help for certain storm events, because you're able to use that storage more efficiently. And then we looked at some public-owned property, you know, is it possible to construct basins on that? And then kind of as a last option, just because of the expense involved, is some of these structures, when we are recommending a detention pond for an area, it might require either acquiring in part or whole private property to construct a basin. Most of the alternatives that we're going to go through in these slides are storage related, with the exception of the Oakwood subdivision. Most of those are kind of extending and enhancing the public storm sewer system, and then building some rear yard drains to connect into the system to provide positive drainage for the rear yards. But a lot of these other areas are areas that additional storage is needed to prevent the water from ponding and flooding out existing homes. Again, the types of projects, floodproofing, upsizing or modification of existing sewers. There's a few areas where we're proposing to put a pond, and we're proposing that then the sewer that drains into that pond would be allowed to be bigger, because then you're going to catch that water, store it, detain it, and then release it in a controlled manner to the downstream area. And then in some areas, the overland flow routes that existed prior to construction or some encroachment needs to be reestablished as part of this project. Another thing is the installation of rear yard inlets. In a lot of areas, residents have identified where water is standing in the back of their yards, and typically what is needed is to construct what is usually a private sewer that drains from their backyard and connects into the public sewer, but that rear yard is part of their responsibility to operate and maintain, because it's really a benefit to their system. again, create floodwater storage. What does that mean? Construct detention basins, and then combinations thereof. And then now we'll go into the specific projects in each of the locations. Most of Oakwood, we'll go through a whole series of slides in the Oakwood subdivision, where a lot of the recommendation is to add rear yard storm sewers. There are some areas where we're recommending that the public sewers in the streets be extended to allow the rear yards to connect into that system. So those we envision as being kind of the public expense for the village. And then there are some locations in the subdivision that we're recommending that backflow preventer, in other words, it's a rubber device that doesn't allow the water from essentially Lake Charles to back up and flood. There's a couple of low-lying areas along the street where if you put that backflow preventer in and Lake Charles is high, they will at least stay dry until such time that Lake Charles drops in elevation, and then water can flow through there. And then some overland flow swales are also needed in one location. So what we have is a series of slides that shows on this slide, this is kind of, I think these are generally from south to north in the subdivision in Oakwood. What you'll see is in yellow identified on the slide, we're identifying along Independence Avenue and Newport, where the existing storm sewer basically stops. We're recommending that it be extended to the north and slightly to the east to allow some residents that are having problems with their rear yards to be drained and connect into that system. These storm sewers are fairly, not fairly big. I think 12 inches is the biggest that we're recommending on any of these. So it's more of a problem of basically tearing up the existing street to build the sewer as part of that, and then that gives the residents a connection point into the public system such that it allows them to drain their property away. And then what you'll also see along Independence to the west, and then along Champlain Court and Champlain Avenue, you can see there's a fairly long rear yard sewer where there's a series, not every one of those residents along that rear yard drainage identified that they have a problem, but a majority of them did identify a problem. So it would make sense, rather than try to connect each individual home out to Independence, is to cooperate and build a single sewer. There's definitely an economy of scale in building a sewer along that rear yard and provide inlets all the way, at each property, so it's that they can tie their drainage into that system. The next slide is to the north along Baltimore Avenue and Oakwood Place. And again, we're showing another one of those multi-lot where we had quite a few residents in this area. Not every resident, but a majority of the residents identify that they were having rear yard drainage problems. And so rather than try and tie individual sewers, in our opinion, it makes more sense to tie a single rear yard drain along this path and then tie it into the public system. Another area here in the corner along Oakwood Drive, again, tying into the public system and draining the rear yard. The other thing on this slide is there's an existing area along Lake Charles where there's a very large storm sewer located at this location along Baltimore, and go back to that slide, along Baltimore, and you see that they're having problems with, there's a beach area, Westman or Westerman, I'm not sure I call it. Westman Beach. And they're having erosion problems. So what we're recommending is that that area be regraded and provide a positive swale through there, such that, you know, that area will need to remain dedicated for that purpose. And then what has happened on the other side, there is a depressed curb that has come through, and again, that either the swale will, either two swales, one on each side of the beach, or a connection between the two, depending on the final configuration that will go through there. But there's definitely an area, this is where that large storm sewer comes in to Lake Charles, one of the locations for that. And then again, this is one of those locations where we're recommending a backflow preventer. The idea, backwards here. The idea is that this area is just slightly below the high water elevation of Lake Charles. And so if we connect all these areas into the storm sewer system, there's potential that the water from Lake Charles could back up into the storm sewer and sit for an extended period of time in those areas. Again, this is on a fairly infrequent basis that would ever occur, but we still recommend that a backflow or basically a rubber duckbill be placed in the sewer system to prevent the water from Lake Charles, when Lake Charles is high, to prevent it from backing up into the residences' rear yards and the area along Baltimore. This area, the next area is to the north. We're again recommending some extension along Hamilton Avenue and Hamilton Court, and also Hamilton Avenue to the east, to allow residents to connect into the system. What we have shown here at the bottom of the slide is two individual rear yard drains. Again, this might be an area, rather than having two drains, it might be possible to connect those two and eliminate one of those two drains coming into the system. And then the other thing is the residents along Revere Avenue. There is a fairly large storm sewer. It's a 4-foot in diameter storm sewer that runs under Revere Avenue. And what we've recommended, what residents have observed, is that water stands in the street for an extended period of time. And part of it, their feeling is that it's due to the leaves and debris that are in the street come along and collect on the inlets. And the inlets that are located in pretty much all of Oakwood are the typical round inlets that sit flat in the street. And they don't have any riser portion on them. So if debris does come along, it does tend to get sucked onto those horizontal surfaces. So we are recommending that at least along this stretch, because it was ID'd as a problem area, that more traditional, the square grates with a small riser section, such that even if the flat grate part gets stuck, it has a piece that is higher in elevation, and it would allow the water to still access the storm sewer system. Now, that's not to say that doing this is going to take care of all the problems along here. What is also happening is, because there is a large sewer that comes through here, and what we saw in the model is that you will see water standing in the street during more severe storm events, closer to the 10-year storm event. So now we're further to the kind of the west side of Lake Charles. Again, there's another large storm sewer. So looking at the bottom of this slide, there's a large storm sewer that daylights into Lake Charles. And that area along Oakwood Avenue, we're recommending that another backflow preventer be placed on the storm sewer in that general vicinity. And then, again, there are some rear yard drains shown in the upper area connecting into the public storm sewer system that runs along Oakwood Avenue. Now we're moving a little further north in the subdivision. Again, showing a fairly long rear yard drainage system, but this is an area where there is no easy accessible public sewer except at that location to the west along Blackhawk Park. And then on the north part of this slide, again, a rear yard drain along Williamsburg Street. And then this got out of order, but it's to the south, actually. Now we're running along Arlington, down along Franklin. We have a series of rear yard drains through there. We're recommending a public sewer be extended along Orleans Place that would allow those residents in that area to connect into the public sewer with their rear yard drainage. And then, again, what we're showing at the bottom of this slide is that long T-shaped rear yard drainage system. Again, there were not all of the residents located along that were reporting problems, but a majority of them were reporting that they were having rear yard flooding problems in that area. And then now we're moving back up to the north. We recommend extending this existing sewer along Oakwood Avenue to the north to allow for a pickup of some rear yard problems. And then in between Oakwood and Williamsburg, there's again a fairly long stretch of sewer where you would need to hook up a private, what we would call a private sewer, into the public system. So that kind of takes care of Oakwood subdivision. Again, there were a lot of different issues ID'd by their survey. Again, they had 62 individual queries as part of that. So we did look at those areas in detail. So now we're moving on to 300 to 400 Warwick improvements and what we're recommending for this area. Because of the depressional nature of 400 Warwick, what we see is that there's really, other than creating additional storage, there's just really nothing that can be done to reduce the flood elevations in this area. We did look at expanding the pipes slightly to the north. Really, Traube, the storm sewer that's located along that avenue, is also undersized in and of itself. And actually what we found during the computer modeling is that because Traube is higher in elevation, there are times when the water actually will run uphill, or what would be normal flow direction, and run into this area along 400 Warwick for a period of time. So one of the things that we're recommending is that we stop that water from Traube and areas points north from running into that. That helps a little bit. But by and large, we really need to expand the storage. We've shown a conceptual design on this. This reservoir, if it was built as shown, basically Warwick would stop being a through street with this particular design. And you would have to come up with a methodology of connecting driveways to the public street. So it would not be an easy solution. But we need this much storage in order to be able to relieve the flooding that's occurring on 400 Warwick, and it also allows us to provide a positive outlet for the 300 block of Warwick. So really the two were tied together into a single alternative. And then what we're showing there in red is that new sewer. It would be substantially larger. Today that sewer is 12 inches in diameter. That would actually be going up to a 36-inch diameter storm sewer to drain that area into this pond. And then we would also pick up the drainage along Melrose and drain it into that pond, store it, release it at a well-defined release rate, and drain it off to the sewer at Traube, and then it proceeds to the east into Clarendon Hills. This is a fairly expensive alternative. Obviously, it has some land acquisition issues. We did look at, could we put the storage underground? Could we put the storage in just the right-of-way? There is just not enough room in this corridor to do that and still have an effective basin in that area. The other problem with underground storage, at least in this area, is that we really don't have very much room between the bottom of the pipe and the ground in this particular location. So unless you go to a pumped situation, which is fairly expensive, underground storage is just not an alternative in this area. The other alternative, which is to flood-proof individual properties located along here, both on the 300 and 400 block. So those are kind of what it comes down to, is we really need to provide more capacity for the 300 block to get access to this system, and then we need to store and hold that water, not just from the 300 block, but also from the 400 block in the area that's tributary to the 400 block, and then release that in a controlled manner. The next area, Rosewood Court and Blackhawk Drive, we're recommending, again, we looked at this pond in pretty good detail. We didn't find any deficiencies, so we're recommending what we think is happening is the restrictor on this pond is very small, and we think that's probably getting plugged fairly frequently. And on a pond this small, when it gets plugged up frequently, really has a negative effect, because even though it's a small outlet, it is critical on these storms that it has that capacity running through the system, and otherwise it just simply overflows and causes problems in the Blackhawk area. The next area we looked at was in Liberty Park. And again, what we're recommending is to expand the additional detention basins. Part of that will be, there'll have to be some land acquisition associated with that. We haven't shown that on this slide. We have some concept sketches that show different configurations for different basins, but pretty much the existing detention basins that are out there today need to get between 1.5 to 2 times larger than what they currently are today to be able to help mitigate some of the problems that we're seeing in that area. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what we're recommending, is to expand the existing areas, make them bigger. It will require land acquisition in order to do that, because as you can see, there's nowhere that's not occupied by a house right now in that area. Along Roslyn, one of the first things, and probably the easiest thing that we can recommend, is to put a backflow preventer in that sewer. It is a 15-inch sewer. It's got decent capacity. It doesn't quite meet the 10-year criteria, but it's pretty close. But we're recommending that it be tied in, and then a new sewer outlet be created instead of going into West End, which is where the sewer currently goes. Extend that further to the west to Cumner and Burlington. And then also there's an overflow route between 15 and 19 Roslyn that needs to be reestablished as part of the overall drainage of the area. Related to that is the Cumner and Burlington. We're recommending that a basin be constructed at this location. It'll help provide an outlet for that Roslyn Road. You'll also be able to drain. There's a sewer that comes down Cumner that could be tied into that basin, and then that basin then would outlet to the sewer that goes under the tracks and actually goes into Downers Grove. That's why Downers Grove is interested in this particular location. Is the immediate downstream of this is Downers Grove. So we would look at the benefits that would be realized as part of that. Granton, Chicago. Granton, Chicago is one of those depressional areas. It's fairly small in area, but the storm sewer is pretty large. There's a pretty big drainage area that comes, that is tributary to that storm sewer. So what we're recommending is in this area that residential floodproofing be performed. We looked at some alternatives. Could we put storage somewhere along that storm sewer? And there really was not anywhere that was of sufficient size that we could determine that would be effective in reducing the flood elevation at this location. And then further downstream, it only gets worse at Washington and Chicago. Again, that intersection, it's low, it does get inundated, and so we're recommended that the residents that surround that intersection that have problems, that they be flood-proofed as part of an overall campaign to reduce flooding in that area. Deer Creek subdivision, going all the way towards the south part of the village. Again, reestablish the overland flow paths. There has been some encroachment that we found when we did the survey. And then we'll look at moving that overflow further to the west so that it does line up with the street rather than, you can kind of see there's an existing pond, and that's where the overflow actually occurs today. And then that would have to be coordinated with Downers Grove because that's outside of your limits. Park and 55th. Again, this is an area where the storm sewer is very large. It has a large tributary area to it. We looked at, could we make the pipes bigger and provide storage in the pipes? That sometimes is an alternative that is effective in this, but because of the gross size and the drainage area of this pipe and the fact that basically there is no detention along this reach of the storm sewer, really the best alternative is residential floodproofing. Another thing, and this will come up when we're talking about the funding sources, is DuPage County does maintain a list of residents through the entire county that are eligible for buyout. It has to meet a certain criteria. We think that the properties that I think there are two that are there would meet the criteria for being included in that DuPage County list. Granted, you're competing with all of the other properties throughout DuPage County, but at least it's not your money that would be going towards that. Once you're on that list, then you just basically move up as they acquire properties. And they get money from the federal government and from the state for acquisition. So, Oak and Quincy, we've ID'd some open space areas adjacent to it. We're recommending a small detention basin be built at this location to help alleviate some of the flooding. And again, we show that dot, it's kind of in a conceptual, it might be there, it might actually be further, it might be on the west side of Oak Street, that the actual area get constructed as part of the basin. We've looked at 2 or 3 different alternatives throughout that area. Dallas and Richmond, again, the village has already done this, but just to note that the berm was reconstructed along the north side of the basin. They're working with Clarendon Hills to install a dewatering valve that will help allow the basin to dewater more quickly and to empty out faster, such that then it will help reduce the pressure on that large storm sewer that runs along Dallas Avenue. And then again, because the sewer is so large, it's collecting drainage from a substantial area to the west. We're recommending individual floodproofing for the properties that have reported problems along that area. 60th and Fairview, again, it's reestablished the overland flow routes through this area as part of an overall drainage scheme to allow positive drainage through the system. Richmond and Grant, again, we looked at this area. There is some backflow that does occur, not on a frequent basis, but it does occur. So we're recommending that a preventer be placed downstream of the actual intersection. And then what we're recommending is some sort of under drain system along the right-of-way of Richmond to help pull that water down. What we observed, during their survey, field survey, when our people went out to physically measure the pipes, is that they had a hard time seeing some of the pipes just because they're underwater. And this was not on a rainy day that was occurring. Washington, Norfolk, again, this is an area where we did an analysis of the storm sewer. We didn't really see a major problem. Now, remember, when we run these analysis, we assume that the pipe is open and flowing free. And we didn't see that there's a large area of backup in this area. So what we're recommending is some selective televising of the sewers in the area be done and completed, and then repair and replace as needed through that area. 200 North Warwick, again, this is a large storm sewer that's running right down Warwick Avenue. It's draining a pretty large area. We looked at upsizing the pipe, providing additional storage. There really is not an alternative to do that in an effective manner and provide effective storage. So what we're recommending is the 2 or 3 homes that ID'd problems, that we've flood-proofed them to keep the water away from the structure. 300 South Warwick, we're recommending there is no storm sewer along Warwick Avenue, and we're recommending that a storm sewer be placed down Warwick to allow it to be connected. We will have to coordinate that work with DuPage DOT because it would be a new sewer that would be hooked into their system, but this area does drain naturally to DUDOT, so typically those things are not too bad to get approved. I won't say it's going to be super simple, but it should be fairly straightforward.
Jerry, there are a couple of examples you used yellow for public storm sewer. Should I assume this would be public?
We would, anything in the public right-of-way, we would assume to be a public improvement, public sewer. Yeah, I apologize for that. We did 2 different CAD techs on 2 different days, and
Okay.
I kind of ran out of time, and I noticed that some are red and some are yellow. But the intent is that this would be a public. Most of these outside of Oakwood subdivision, most of these other, when I show a storm sewer, it's intended to be a public improvement, not a private improvement. West 56th Place, again, there is an existing sewer located along along the street there, and what we're recommending is that a rear yard drainage system be installed with that and drain that area. Hampton Avenue, again, we call for residential floodproofing. The areas affected are actually a little bit away from the pond. And then what we recommend is that some sort of under drain system be installed in the area that drains into the pond, but it has to have a backflow preventer because there will be times where that pond will rise in elevation and be up for an extended period for several days. And we don't want to create a situation where you're actually having water have access to the ground in that area, and the pipe will actually exfiltrate. The water will saturate the ground in that area. So that's kind of it through the project solutions. And we'll go through this in some other slides, but we are preparing opinions of probable costs for all of these alternatives. I'm sure you're all dying to know how much this would cost. Basically, the cheaper alternatives are on the order of magnitude of $5,000. The most expensive alternative without land acquisition costs, because we're not appraisers, and so that's one of the things that how do we come up with a value for that? Because you really do need to know that total cost is just the excavation of the ponds and, construction of sewers. The most expensive project is on the order of magnitude of about $350,000. So that's the range that we're talking about for some of these solutions. And so what we are trying to go through here, and at least so that you're aware of it, the report will go into more detail about these programs. There are FEMA grant monies for stormwater projects. The HMGP, that stands for Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. It's a program administered by FEMA. It's competitive nationwide. It's not easy to get money from this, but it never hurts to submit a grant application. The process is fairly straightforward for applying for the grants under this. And most of the FEMA programs, the procedure is fairly similar between the programs. It's just a different pot of money, but the way that they administer it is very similar. So a lot of the times, if you apply for one of the programs, you might as well apply for all three. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, these are typically monies that are made available after a disaster is declared. This is money that was ID'd as part of the flooding in 2008 that is available to this area. And then there's another program that's called the Pre-Disaster Mitigation, and it's just what it says. If you can ID that you've got an area, you're trying to build something to keep flooding, properties from flooding, it's better to build the project and prevent properties from flooding before the flood occurs rather than after the flood occurs, which is usually how FEMA gets its money, actually. The state of Illinois, some communities have been successful in getting CDBG grants for this. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency also runs a water quality program, the 319 grants. Typically, those grants, there are two restrictions on those. They deal with water quality, which you would qualify for if you're building a detention basin, but then they also typically need to have an educational component. So that would be how we would have to fit that portion of the process into the 319 grant. DuPage County does have, I talked about it earlier, they do keep a list of property acquisition. They receive funding both from the state and from FEMA to acquire properties and remove them, take them out of the floodplain. Again, the only restriction on that is that it always be permanent open space, but that does not preclude you from turning that space into a detention pond or another type of facility. It's just that you can't turn around and say, oh, you know, let's build a building on that property. It has to remain as open space if it is acquired through that funding. And then they do have stormwater project funding, both for municipal projects and for unincorporated projects that would primarily be involved with the Liberty Park area, more so than a lot of your others, because they are looking for projects that kind of help other adjacent communities. So the one with Downers Grove, that Cumner and Burlington, that would possibly be one that we would at least approach the county and see what their response would be on that, because it's cooperative between communities. A thing I think that's important to mention, at least for the Liberty Park area, I know that the vote is coming up for the dissolution or the recommendation on the dissolution. DuPage County's made it pretty clear that until that dissolution occurs, they're not interested in funding projects in that area because they don't, you know, they look at it as if taxes being collected for that purpose, they don't want to be expending their dollars on that type of project. And then local funding, something to consider. I know it was mentioned, at least at the beginning, because of the limitations, more and more communities are starting to look at stormwater utilities. And what a utility is essentially what it says is people pay gas, electric, water, sewer bills. It is a utility for stormwater. It's based on the amount of imperviousness that you have on your property. And it's usually billed at, usually work it that it's billed at the same time your property taxes are billed. And then it gives you a revenue source to allow you to build these type of projects throughout the community. And there have been communities in Illinois that have been successful in passing the stormwater utility and setting them up and getting them off the ground. And it's been, I know they've found it invaluable to fund these type of projects, mostly because I know this looks like a long list and that there's money everywhere, but we all know all of these areas you're competing with everyone else and you're competing with other projects. And a lot of these, you have to show that the benefits of the project are such that it makes it attractive for funding of these facilities. And most of these, unless you're assisting other communities or adjacent communities, a lot of them, you know, it's tough because really what we're doing is designing projects to assist the area of specific need. Some additional recommendations that we're putting in the report for you is don't allow fee in lieu of detention where there are known problem areas downstream. Now you've got a pretty comprehensive list of areas where we know there are problems, and even if it's hardship, by allowing a fee in lieu of, the tendency is not to build the project immediately, but to hold that money. And it's really recommended that the detention is definitely a vital part of this. What we looked at, one of the things that we did look at was what happens if an additional 10% of the properties build out to their maximum allowed limit within the zoning category. And what you would have is, even with just 10% of the lots going to that development, you'll get an extra 25% hit in storage requirement. For all these areas where we're recommending storage, those ponds need to get 25% bigger. So it's not just 10% added to that. It really has a dramatic impact on the overall storage volume within the storage areas. And then consider adding a fee for all impervious area additions, even if it's an addition that wouldn't typically require detention storage. There are recommended fees that could be added because they are adding additional load on the system. And if it's an area that you know is a problem, the simplest would be just to adopt a blanket wide, but you could even come up with a different fee or different multiplier for each of the 4 watersheds. We have that level of detail available to you, and those are the type of issues that we'll put in the report for you, and it'll be for your decision on what to implement in these areas. The last is add all of the overbank flooded homes to the DuPage County buyout list. That will require a little bit more work. We need to physically survey the house. We've got a little bit of budget left to do some of that, but we are recommending that be added just so that all those properties get added to the list, such that DuPage County's policy is that if a homeowner doesn't want to take buyout, they will not go to condemnation. It's a voluntary program strictly. And so what happens is it is ranked by the most frequently flooded homes and the most severely damaged homes all the way to the least severely damaged. But they go down that list, and then once a homeowner rejects the offer, then they kind of fall off the list. So it's not, they do work through the system on a fairly systematic basis. And an additional recommendation, I forgot to add it to it, is to consider adding, you have the capability of adding a more restrictive release rate in each of the 4 different watersheds. Again, we can assist you with coming up with a technically defensible rationale for coming up with that, and basically what that does is that requires additional storage for these properties when you know that they're draining into an area where we have known problems. Next steps, obviously we will finish the map inundation areas on the new topography. We're working on prioritizing all of these solutions. Basically what will come to you will be a long list with all of these projects, the costs associated with them, and then at least our first cut at a recommended ranking of all the solutions. Which ones are, as Steve said, which ones are the kind of the easy, probably the cheaper in dollar amounts that can get mobilized on fairly quickly, are easier to deal with budgetarily. And then we get into the more difficult projects where you're either in land acquisition mode or you are working with an adjacent community or other entity to obtain funding for that, and that just gets more complex. And then obviously we need to complete the final report to you. The idea is to get this to you as quickly as possible such that we know you're getting ready to go into your budget process. So we want to get these recommendations to you so that you are able to act on the, at least these, what I would call the easy projects to construct, and get some of the work underway as quickly as possible. And that's it for me. I'm here for the rest of the night, and I guess if you have questions, now's the time.
Do you want some water?
Questions from,
Thank you.
questions from board members?
Jerry, I have a question for you. If there is a lot of recommendation in there and analysis about the storm sewers having insufficient capacity, if they were increased in ways that they could have sufficient capacity, what do they run into at the village boundaries? If a 36-inch storm sewer or 24 runs into a 12 when it hits Clarendon Hills, you're going to have a different problem.
Right, and that's that's why you didn't see a lot of those recommendations. Most of the recommendations for storm sewers are to drain an area more effectively into either a created detention pond that is under your control or is a facility like that. But yes, basically, if you increase the pipe size on your storm sewer and then it gets necked down at the village boundary, then all that extra pipe and all that extra expense, because these pipes are very expensive as you get bigger, essentially what you're doing is providing storage only. You're not providing capacity to convey the water through the system faster. So it's a very expensive way to provide detention storage is what it comes down to. So that's why you really didn't see those type of alternatives. It would be cheaper to build basically vaults under the street because, you know, you're tearing up the street anyway to build the pipe. If it's a big enough pipe, you're looking at a fairly big construction project. So you might as well put in a vault that would have quite a bit of storage relative to, you know, a round pipe section.
Now, one of the questions comments you keep saying is to the floodproofing. What does something like that cost to floodproof a home?
It varies depending on the types of materials used. If it is, and it depends on the house, really. And that's, we've had anywhere from probably just under $10,000 to around $20,000, depending on the perimeter of the house. And
it's a wall or it's underground? How does it?
typically, the cheapest is a concrete wall. And it's aesthetically probably the least
Okay, well,
preferable.
I mean, that was one of the, or I think that was the option for Hampton Avenue, and that's a townhome subdivision. I don't see that, I mean, that's not a viable solution in that area.
Yeah. Okay.
Other questions?
I want to hear what the public's got to say.
Can I just ask one more question? Jerry, you said you were going to do the suggested priorities so that the little cheaper projects could go first. Is it possible for you to do two priority lists, one the little cheaper projects, and the other the seriousness of the situation? Because obviously standing water in a yard, even if it's cheap, is not as serious as somebody's house flooding with sanitary sewer.
Sure. That's easy enough to do.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have some people in the audience that want to get up? The lady in. Wait, but try to keep your comments as close as you can to 3 minutes, please.
I'll do my best. You compared the 100-year storm in '08, but you didn't say nothing about the one in '07 when none of our houses on our 300 block flooded at all. And that was during the construction of the street of Chicago Avenue, which everybody says isn't a problem. Does water flow through concrete is what I want to know. I've asked this question, I don't know how many times. Can water flow through concrete? You know, that's why my house flooded. That's why it's still flooded. You said that the ground was frozen, and that was why the sewers were taking longer. Why is water coming out of it? Why is it coming backwards? You know, like sprinklers in the pictures that I've showed everybody where the water's coming back out of the sewer just because the ground's frozen. You know, we got a flood right down the street again. You know, we barely had anything. And right at the corner, when you leave here, anyone that leaves here,
It's not frozen.
it's not, yeah, it's not frozen, and we're flooded again right at the corner.
The street and the sidewalks on both east and west side are both flooded right now. and at a major intersection where we have parents walking kids to school, and we have to park across the street, and this morning cars are sliding through the intersection because it's all ice and it's underwater, all yesterday, all day today. Water in the streets is not a good option.
No, and I've already had $5,000 in waterproofing done to my house before all this happened. I've had quotes for over $15,000. What is this waterproofing? Is that our responsibility, you're saying, for when you say for the houses?
Typically, I can't speak for the board, but typically residential flood proofing is an individual property owner's expense. The village usually offers technical assistance in the design and the procurement of it. Now, about the storm sewer and the concrete, I believe that that's along Naperville Road, correct?
Yes.
That is upstream of you. That area drains down into your property. So if that pipe was plugged, why would it? It would
You
be
just
a
said
good
we
thing
drain
from-
south. I wrote it down in here. You said we drain south, and you said it drains north.
Correct. The pipe drains to the north.
But you said it
The
also.
ground drains to the south.
Okay. Isn't
So
that?
what's not to understand? If the pipe is blocked with concrete, as you said, and that concrete is to the south of you, so it's upstream of the pipe system, that would actually be helping you in the overall drainage.
It didn't help much when we were
Well,
flooded.
that's what I'm saying is.
Okay. All right, I don't want to take up my 3 minutes. We paid $200,000 for something a resident said for the same solution for every one of these solutions. Our village wasted a ton of money here.
Next person.
Basically, I have a question, gentleman from the village
You wanna-
I was at the last flood meeting, and he said the study for my property was done, and I'd be hearing something from somebody, and I still haven't heard anything from anybody. That's at 520 North Park. And I didn't see anything for my property or my neighborhood on any of these studies this evening here.
What I
So,
did return your call, and the message is that the Surface Water Protection District, we contacted them, and it is their storm sewer that owns it.
okay.
And the pipe that runs, you have a backyard issue, right?
Yes, sir.
And
And the
the pipe-
basement, well, the house flooded three
Yeah.
times.
But the
five
pipe that
times.
runs from the back,
Yeah.
they had no idea or the identification of when that was installed or by who, and it appears to be going underneath the garage. So they don't know the condition of, the pipe
Well,
that runs
This is
through
all
there.
news to me, I never heard.
Yeah,
of
I'm
it.
only,
Oh.
relaying what they, told me, but it's in that district, so we don't have any, record
And
of
what
its
district is
installation.
that, sir?
The Westmont Surface Water Protection District.
Okay, and who do I contact to have that looked into then, or is that their?
No, they did look into it. That was their answer back, is they don't take responsibility, ownership of that pipe.
Oh, okay. So basically, my property isn't any further consideration then?
It's not that it's in any further consideration, it's that it is on private property, it's not located in an easement, and all we can do is inspect it from the street. So we don't have, good information as to the,
On the street, if it's behind a house, behind a fence.
no, I mean like running a camera through it or something from the street location. Kind of to elaborate on that, they referenced the advisory referendum that's on the ballot regarding the dissolution of the district. And not that, there's any position one way or the other, but the Village of Westmont, the Village of Downers Grove, and DuPage County are working cooperatively together to enter into agreements that in the event that the dissolution does occur, that we have, a process in place and is how we're going to reestablish responsibilities for these areas. And your location is in the corporate boundaries of Westmont, so that would be something that we would ultimately inherit.
If this organization is dissolved?
Right. But that doesn't change the fact that it is, located on private property, not in an easement, and we don't know, when it was installed and by who.
So we're on our own?
Well, we just don't have any better information.
All right, thank you, sir.
On that, nothing on him, if you drop his head, is that because it's
The question regarding Hidden View Drive is, it's not that they didn't have information on it, but that is actually the one location where we already have a construction plan and design already done, so that's just a matter of proceeding. Need to come up, please. I didn't mention when we started, this is a formal village board meeting, and it is being televised, so because it's being recorded and will be replayed, it's important that you come up to the podium. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the
Sure.
I do appreciate that you included Liberty Park, but I'm also asking, are you aware that extreme amount of water is coming down from Indian Trails at the rear west end, and it comes down like Niagara Falls? It's not a little stream. It washes away that whole berm. So, I mean, and if the district is dissolved, I don't know what you're going to inherit for Westmont, but this is your water coming from the townhouses. That's coming down on Liberty Park because we're at the west end of the ridge line, the normal ridge line. So the water is coming down on Liberty Park from this way, and it's Westmont water. When you put, I mean, I'm not blaming you, but I'm saying it's Westmont water. And you've got the parking lot all completely paved for the mall on Ogden and Cass. When that was all hard surface, what does that happen? Underneath, under Cass Avenue, all that water is draining toward Liberty Park. It overflows and overtakes the detention ponds, which might be able to hold the residents' property, but not with all the additional water coming from Westmont. It's not right. You say, well, I'm worried. I hear you saying you're going to put in deflectors and you're going to increase this to get the water off the street from the people in Oakwood. Where's it going to go? It's going to go the natural ridge line, Liberty Park. From Liberty Park down to Cumner. And on Cumner, there is the natural accumulation of sediment right off of Cumner between Chicago and Ogden Avenue. I mean, it's a huge pile of sediment that has to be cleaned every week. I drive past it all the time, and it's blocked up. Then you get that baggage all the way back. The water doesn't go through. The water, when it seeps through, goes through Cumner Park. You're going to think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. That somehow mysteriously, through some miracle, that sluice gate gets closed so that the people in Burnham Woods don't get water on their lawns, but Liberty Park gets it in their basements. People are just, they don't think they can get any help from anybody. And now, if you inherit or take over a certain part of the detention area because the surface water is going to dissolve, who's going to maintain those pumps? He's saying, oh, pumps are very expensive. We know that. We've paid for them. Are you going to maintain those pumps?
Yeah, well, you've hit a very large number of topics all related to the same issue in Liberty Park. And it does, the Surface Water Protection District is not large as far as districts go, but essentially a third of the north end of this district is in unincorporated DuPage County, and the rest of it is either in the village of Downers Grove, a small part, or most of it's in the village of Westmont.
I understand.
We are aware of what the Indian Trail subdivision and their detention basin, and because that is higher, and like you said, you're talking about Adams and 39th Street, is as you described, a depressional area in all directions. Geographically is the low point in a very large subregion. So the water that is detained in Indian Trails is done by subdivision. All the water is kept in a detention basin, but when the detention basin is at capacity, even through the restrictor overland, it does go down into that area.
It sure does. And we've got a double barrel line going through that area too. I mean, I'm going to put another double barrel line, and then, like she said, you accumulate all this water, and so you got all this storage in these pipes, but it's going to end up in the DuPage River, Illinois River, and then so forth down the line. But in the meantime, here you got people who don't want water on their lawn. Down goes the gate. All of a sudden, everybody's calling me and saying, I got water in my basement. There's water backing up. and we know exactly where to go. Take a ride over there, sure enough, it's closed. You go down Cumner, there's huge piles of sediment that accumulate. You have to look off the road, and you'll see it. It's all backing up. Those poor people that live north of that, I mean, they've done tremendous flood-proofing. Those old people were crying every day. They finally died and said, we don't have to do this anymore, and they sold the house and they built a different type of home there that had a different pattern, and they don't have as much flooding as they did before. But it's just terrible when this accumulates there. And you're going to inherit these problems if you're going to be taking on a
Some of them,
certain
yes.
section.
It is, that is true. And although we haven't finalized the agreement, but the intent is the Village of Westmont would be the owner of that detention
I'm
basin
not
at
that
30.
naive to think that you're going to run over and help us. You've got enough problems of your own.
Well,
I mean,
that's
should
why
you
it's
run over
included in
and
the
help us?
study, and helping you is two parts. One, what is the solution? And then two is how is that
understand.
going to be done?
I appreciate, I was
Yeah.
waiting to see if it was included in the study, because we were concerned.
We are, and Jerry didn't mention, but DuPage County is kind of not only in this intergovernmental agreement with respect to the dissolution, but even without that discussion, because, like he said, some water from Westmont is tributary to Liberty Park, and then Liberty Park is tributary to Westmont on the other side of Ogden, is that it's all part of, stormwater doesn't know the boundaries,
That's
you know,
right.
municipal boundaries, and it has been part of our study, and DuPage County is participating in this too. We all share the same interest.
And I'm sure you're more knowledgeable than I am or anyone else. All we get is the
I'd like to know
results,
what you
and I
know.
get the phone calls. And, you know, I feel sorry for these people. They don't know what to do. All I'm asking, in all your wisdom, Mr. Engineer, please don't direct more water into Liberty Park. We have enough. We take your water now. Please don't redirect what you've got and put more on us.
I would say that would be true. If it's tributary to that direction, it will continue to go to that direction.
On that ridge line, I
Yeah.
understand.
Okay.
But we don't need no more.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, gentleman in
I
back.
have a question.
Would you come up to the podium, please?
Last meeting, we were here and complaining about our basement got flooded with water because in our backyard, our neighbors on our backyard, the house is about like 6 feet higher than ours. So when the storm goes, all the water is like coming down to our house, and we got basement flooded more than 3 times at least, and we even like kicked out by the insurance, you know, with because we got so many times flooded. I just wonder if you can do something about it. It's we are located in Deming.
6, but the between the two streets is not the end of the
What is
it's
your
not
house
the end of
address?
the-
221 Deming Street, Deming Place.
2201?
221
221 Deming Street.
Deming
No,
Place.
Deming Place, yeah.
Yeah, I can't, I mean, I don't know what Jerry has, but I mean, we just have the overall, you know, feedback from the study, so I don't have any specific information regarding that address.
We can certainly look at it. I don't know off the top of my head for that particular location for you.
Farmingdale Cove.
Okay.
No.
It's in
Ash-
Farmingdale Cove, is it?
Ashford.
No, Deming.
Way south.
Oh, maybe it is Ashford.
It's Ashford. It's Ashford.
Before we did the, you know, public survey, there was, I had each supervisor, you know, the engineer and the 2 supervisors from the street division who deal with these things regularly, and they each took a map and mapped out all of the problem areas that they were without consulting with each other and put those all together, and Jerry had all that information even before he did the study. So we had a lot of marks all throughout Farmingdale. I don't believe Farmingdale was a very high response in the survey, though.
Was there, how much response came out of Ashford?
Almost nothing.
That's what I thought.
So 221.
Yeah.
Response out of Ashford.
Yeah.
It is Ashford.
It's Ashford.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And
I didn't mean to say
ourselves, it
Farmingdale.
was Ashford. We did change it.
We were kicked out by the insurance. We cannot even buy the waterproof insurance, sun pump insurance for the
It
basement.
sounds like the one Fred was looking at where the backyards are, the other half of the block is significantly higher than,
We just want to.
Wasn't some suggestion made for them they needed to re-dredge that whole
This
area?
street is
The retention area
over
behind
there.
there.
So this street, the whole street is up to our
To the homeowners association of Ashland, at one time they were complaining about it filling up so fast or whatever.
There is a backyard,
Somebody
is
made it go,
and
okay, it needed to be. Okay.
okay, thank you.
We duly noted. Anyone else?
Oh, thank you very much for doing this survey. At least we're all pretty comfortable in the fact that we're not thinking we're nuts or anything. We know we got water problems, and we know it's going to be costly. Here's a question for you. I don't think you were prepared to hear. For anyone who is having flooding problems, they're going to have to fill out this residential real estate property disclosure. Questions number 2 and 3 ask about flooding. I am aware of flooding or recurring leakage problems in the crawl space or basement. And then I am aware that this property is located in a floodplain or currently a flood hazard insurance. Any advice how we're supposed to be filling these things out if we decide to sell our property and we are in an affected area? It's kind of going off of what the other gentleman was saying. He's having problems with getting insurance in his home. What about people who have to fill this out before marketing their house? Any advice? Or
I think you have to be honest on it, unfortunately.
we have to be honest.
It's been a law for many, many years. I know when we sold our home in Darien, we had to disclose that as many as 20 years ago, and we did disclose it, and, you know,
Is
we
there
still
an-
sold the house.
Sure. Is there anything that can be said or retrieved from the village saying, yeah, we're aware of it, we're all working on it? You know, to help a potential buyer of property. You know, not that, oh, yeah, we live in a floodplain, but,
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
yeah. I was just wondering,
I can't say there's any direct assistance, but it's the type of phone calls we receive with regularity where people, I guess just doing their due diligence, will ask their own questions about known areas and what's in there, and we, you know, we'll discuss whatever public improvements we have planned, what areas we're aware of, and whether or not it could be with or without being in a you know, a platted floodplain area. So sometimes there's local floodplain, you know, that are just designated, you know, in Westmont and things like that. So I mean, it is something that's done, but it's done when the, you know, the request comes in. There's no, you know, prepared document to issue or anything. It's just.
so then we would be checking off, yes, we have flooding.
Well, if your home has flooded, yes.
If it is someone who is obviously in an area that has
Well,
flooded.
not necessarily just the area. I believe it's if your home has flooded.
Your
So you might be in the
personal
area,
property.
but your home hasn't flooded, is the way I would understand it.
I
Is that
think the
correct?
best thing for you to do is to talk to your Realtor and your attorney who's going to close the house for you, because nobody on this board's going to give you advice on how to fill out those forms.
This is true.
We're
This is
prohibited
true.
from doing that.
Okay, I guess, let me rephrase my question. If we are advised by our personal attorney and our personal realtor to check yes in that area, can we put like a little asterisk type of thing in there that says the village is aware of the problem and they're working on a plan?
You can write anything you want on that form.
Oh,
Mary.
okay. Okay. All right, well, thank you.
I suppose you could.
Next? Yes.
I also want to thank you for doing this. I'm at 508 Blackhawk, and I just wanted to ask, are you, you said about Trabi, the sewer system is not as you said it's 12-inch right now currently. Are we is there any plans in the future to work with surrounding communities like with Clarendon Hills to possibly expand that in the future, I guess, to help the water flow too?
I guess the easy answer for that is definitely yes. That's been identified. Steve's talked about that. We actually work with Clarendon Hills, so we've definitely ID'd that as an area that it could stand to be improved, but it would be a fairly extensive project because pretty much if you're going to do that, you're going to replace the entire sewer, and it's much bigger than a 12-inch. It's on the order of magnitude of a
So, I mean, conceptually, it's
36,
something being
okay.
considered as part of this, but we have not initiated anything directly with Clarendon Hills yet.
But that could help alleviate Warwick and Blackhawk and all that.
Potentially, I mean, it might.
Not so much Warwick, just because they're kind of in a bowl with that, so they have a fairly limited outlet, but it would help probably the other areas.
So it is something that is considered in the future. Wonderful. Thank you.
Anyone else?
This question is for you. I'm right here at Grant and Richmond, where right now, as I speak, we are flooded. We have water standing in the street. You were talking about backflow preventers on the 24-inch drains. It's horrible. First off, how's that going to work if we have standing water already there? That's not going to help at all, getting the water not coming back into the streets. Secondly, I'm assuming that's something similar to like an RPZ, like on your home water lines and stuff like that. Is that something that has to be checked every year, inspected every year? You've got backflow preventers, like you have a sprinkler system in your residence.
Right.
Is that something that has to be inspected every year?
Typically, they actually come with a manufacturer's warranty, and they typically are, yes, they are inspected, but it's mostly just to make sure that debris has not caught up inside them. The idea, what we're proposing with these rubber duckbill items is that debris can actually flow through them. Water pressure will push debris through them, and then they will actually even seal around certain items if they get caught in there. But they do need to be looked at least periodically to make sure that they're not functioning properly.
Okay. And that'll prevent anything from backing up out beyond it.
What the concern was and what he was referring to is that the positive outlet direction is towards Cass Avenue. So anything up in that way, if that's surcharged or running backwards.
From Cass going down
If
towards
it
Grant
is,
and Richmond.
so that there's no, you have the problem with the amount of water that's already tributary to that corner. And if it's being added through sewers working backwards to the low point, then that's the backflow that we're trying to prevent from coming, tributary or new water that isn't normally tributary to that corner.
From Cass going down.
Correct.
Right, but as soon as there's capacity in that to go out, then the flap lets all the water out. So it's true there's standing water there, and it might still stand there, but it's until there's capacity in the pipe to let it out.
To go down there. So it's going to have to be a week before that water goes away, before that would supposedly open up to allow more water out.
Yeah.
Well, I'll call you in a week because it'll be there because,
Actually, there was some there today, yeah.
It was there yesterday, and part of the reason, and I know for a fact, the house across from me slacks right now. I know he's familiar with them. You guys had told them they were not allowed to, their sump pump drained in their yard and it just basically recirculated. And they'd asked if they could run a pipe under the sidewalk out to the curb to allow that water to go into the street and flow down into the drains. And you guys told them absolutely could not do that. But up at 117, the brand new house, over the summer, they actually did that. And if you go there right now, I was there last night for 5 minutes timing it, and that water was running constant right out into the street, down towards the corner, across the street, and down into the drain where there's probably about 5 inches of water standing there right now. And they did it over.
Yeah, I can't answer what, building division or what the code enforcement answer was, but it's my understanding that you cannot, pipe it directly out into the right of way. But
So that's something I have to take up tomorrow then with the building?
Well, or I will too, but the other part is that some of that water, even if you're getting it out into the right of way, and if the right of way, the corner is already flooded, the
Right.
real big issue on that corner is there's no end to the peat that, runs down into the ground. So it's just getting back into groundwater, and it's often all this pumping is the same water going around in a circle. Until
It's out in the
until it
street
can drain
making
away.
it a hazard.
True, and that's one issue all by itself, but then it's all the, there's two components to what Jerry was describing. One was the public nuisance and roads being blocked, and then there's actual physical damage to private property structures and those types of things. So there's two different categories of.
Okay, and as far as blocking roads and public damage to people's houses, when it does flood and we get the 3 feet of water sitting there, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, I have no recourse except to call Westmont Police Department.
And you should.
Who come out, and they're out there usually fairly fast, but they put 2 cones out there.
Steve,
And
excuse me, I have a question about that intersection, because I know the park is there, and that park has partial detention, right?
the sidewalk,
It's just,
But
it's just
I thought
depressed.
there was
and it's not a designed detention anything.
so
It's just low.
what I mean,
The whole
Obviously,
intersection is actually, and it's mapped, it's on the federal floodplain map. I mean, geologically,
So-
it's a low point in a lot of directions.
so working with the park district or potentially turning that park into detention would have no impact on that intersection at all?
I'm not saying it wouldn't, I don't know how easy it'd be to construct, but that's certainly something that's worthy of looking into, and
well, I know,
I'm sure it's one of the
we talked about it
options.
before.
We did look at that. We
I
looked at
imagine you
turning
looked
that
at it.
area into detention pond. It really has no effect on the high water that we were generating in that area.
So it's just
And-
because of
and
the
it
water
has-
level,
It has an
period.
effect, but it's not enough that we would recommend tearing up that particular piece of open space for
So,
detention storage.
okay.
So we did look at that.
You said 117 what?
South Grand.
117 South Grant?
It's the only new house on the block, it's a couple houses down from South School.
You live on northwest corner or northeast?
I'm on the northeast corner.
Northeast.
I got the small house. And then, like you said, you're talking about underground storage at that corner on Richmond. I mean, the only place that's low is the park or across the street. And that'd be the only place you'd be able to put underground storage, and that's basically from there to the alleyway. So that'd be some pretty large
Right.
pipes going in. Okay. Thank you. Oh, is there a way we can get emails or some information? Because I read it, I was at the first meeting, left my email address, phone number, address to get informed about this stuff. I'd called over the couple months of trying to figure out when they were gonna have meetings, and they were saying, well, they're working on it, and they'll let us know as soon as anything is. I read in the paper that it was supposed to be Friday night, and then at the basketball game tonight, I heard it was tonight. Called to verify it and found out it was
Yeah.
tonight, and talking to some other people, they
I
were
will-
unaware of it also.
It's a good point, and we had we had this meeting planned, and being like any public meeting, there is no direct notification of meetings in any situation, unless you had like a public hearing and a special reason by law that you had to require, notifying.
Some people
certain
had gotten
perimeter.
letters from you guys.
Well, if it wasn't, the reason they got the letter was because of the misprint, how it was published as being on the wrong date, and not wanting that mistake to, have everybody, it's one thing to make a mistake and advertise it too early, but when it was too late, I was worried about all the interested people were not in there. So immediately, with the village had and all the whatever contacts we had or email or addresses from the list we had before we started this, before we retained Jerry, immediately
when we had
stuffed
that-
a notice in an
that
envelope
immediate
and mailed
meeting.
those. And then I contacted Jerry's office, and they did the electronic version, and they took all their contact information they had from people that filled out the survey. So I'm
'Cause I
sorry you
filled
got
out a
missed.
survey, so
Yeah.
I just, because I
And
say.
I don't even know that it even
just-
wasn't mailed, it was just that there had to be over
No,
100
they're all
and something
mailed.
notifications.
142 were mailed out.
142 by him and 50 something by us, just trying to, correct that misprint.
All right, so just give me, contact you tomorrow or something, I can give you
Yeah,
that
we'll
information.
do it right away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other final comments from board members? We appreciate everybody coming in. We appreciate the presentation from Christopher Burke, Engineering. we have a lot of, we had a lot of work to do in prioritizing all of the comments, all of the presentation this evening. Obviously, it's going to take a long time and considerable amount of money to solve a lot of these, but as been suggested by our trustee to my left, if they can prioritize some of the larger projects as well as some of the smaller projects so that we can deal with some of these as quickly as we can, and hopefully, considering our budgetary constraints, that we can will include some of this in our budgeting process for next year.
Could we just get, you know, for the people that are here and for the people that aren't here watching, some further clarification with regard to next steps? I know tonight was a draft. Can you give us some sort of timeline on when we would have a final and what that would actually entail?
What I envision is within the next week to 2 weeks at the most, is that we'll be putting together that kind of that matrix. And then as soon as we kind of meet with village staff and get that in some format, then I would propose sending it to you to at least look at. Because that, from your perspective, the report's going to contain all of this presentation plus additional stuff that, you know, it's important to engineers so that we can show that this is how we did the thing, you know, our work. But that's not, what it gets down to is what is the ultimate product, and the ultimate product is kind of this list of projects and the costs associated with it. So we can get that put together. I'm thinking in the next 2 weeks that we'll have that together for you, at least in some format that you can look at and start to say, well, you know, maybe we should look at it this way instead of that way. And
Okay.
The rough probable estimates too? Or
Yes.
just- Okay,
Yes.
good, because that's.
And even though this is the draft findings report, at least we're at this stage, can we put this on the website so that, because I know everybody doesn't have the benefit of having it in book form, and probably very little could be seen on the monitor. So can we get up there for the residents to at least follow along with as we go?
Sure.
That would be great.
One question I have, Jerry, is does the electronic version, will we have better maps than what we've seen in this paper?
I can put a better map.
Some of the early maps where you've got color coding is
For the
a little
questionnaires,
to
yeah.
see in the detail.
Yeah.
And I personally like to see something a little.
Yeah, we can definitely put a pointer, or we have those exhibits in, if they print out, they're in like 36 by 40 sheets, so that they're big enough that you actually could see it. But at least that way you could zoom in on it and, you know, scroll around and find the areas that you're
That's what I'm
looking
hoping.
for.
Something
Oh, that would be
electronically
great.
zoom in on.
Yeah, those are all available.
Okay.
That would be great.
Limitation of PowerPoint versus, you know,
Sure.
trying to cram it into a little space.
Any other suggestions to present the information more clearly to the residents in the village that might be affected, that are affected by this problem?
I would just like to add, if you could put in, I'm still not clear on this flood proofing that you keep talking about. I mean, I understand the detention basin, I understand, you know, additional, you know, pipes, I got that, that makes sense. I'm not sure what the flood proofing is or what it would look like, or I know people have said aesthetically it won't, I can't picture that, so if there's just
Yeah,
more
was it a-
I can
information about
include
it
some
for me.
photos.
That would be very helpful.
And the alternatives, because I mean, somebody might figure, like
Right.
me, I'd think, you know, those commercials where they waterproof your basement.
No, it's not that.
See, that's why we need you to tell us.
Exactly.
You say concrete is one of the most preferred methods of doing that?
It's cheapest.
It's the cheapest. What are some of the alternatives?
Well, typically what you'll do is, instead of making it just a raw wall sitting up, you know, kind of like a moat around your house, you'll build some landscaping or slope, you know, maybe fill inside that area to
Almost a levee.
To make it more aesthetic, right. But then leave it, you don't want that fill to extend beyond that 10-foot perimeter of your building, because that's the limit that is allowed by the county ordinance for the floodproofing. So that 10 feet is kind of, that's a magic number.
And how far down is that concrete going on the ground?
Just depends on how high above the wall, typically at least 4 feet.
Wow.
Doesn't water find its own path and go right around the wall?
I mean, well, there are situations where, you know, the ground is so poor that, you know, you can't put the wall in deep enough that, you know, the water won't equalize itself underneath the wall too. So, I mean, it's a design per property. You actually have to take soil borings and, you know, put something intelligent in.
Right.
So the county has all of the requirements for the
Yes.
construction of something like that if someone wanted to.
Well, permit requirements.
Permit requirements, but actually FEMA has a whole publication about floodproofing.
You mentioned the one,
500 pages long.
when you were talking about funding, you mentioned FEMA and you said something had to be declared an emergency. Does that have to be done by the governor or the county board chairman or the mayor or?
One of those, I forget which of the three, I think it's the flood mitigation assistance. It has to be a federally declared disaster.
Okay.
So, which the 2008 event was federally declared.
I had just one, I guess, comment for you or something that I was very interested in. 2 points were made. One was, you know, talking about well-defined release rates and, you know, local release rates and maybe, you know, declaring by code a, you know, specific release rate for the different drainage basins. And I'd like to take that a step further. And if there's little sub areas that could benefit from their own specific attention, I'd be very interested in what those were. And then he also mentioned, as a recommendation, suspending fee in lieu of. And I appreciated that right away because essentially since we started this study, I have not approved one fee in lieu of. I mean, I won't do it, you know, to make sure that we're not permitting something that we'll find out to be, you know, a problem area as part of the study. So thinking about it, hearing about it tonight, I will be talking to you again about doing that, maybe formally, you know, disallowing fee in lieu ofs until we have a, you know, a finished plan. Or making them all by village board approval as opposed to, you know, eliminating the staff option, because I guess I'm just letting you know, I'm telling everybody no. So.
That's good.
Got it.
Anything further? Quickly.
I didn't hear this one. How did you feel about the village's footprint allowance right now that for like new construction? Did you see anything wrong with the size of footprints that we allow right now?
Floor area ratio.
Yeah, floor area ratio, you know, for further construction in the future.
I can kind of answer that a little bit for you.
Yeah,
We've already started discussing that particular issue of taking the floor area ratios in particular sections of the town and making them smaller. And the reason is because of the size of the footprint on the property. So for instance, right now we allow a 0.40 ratio. We're talking about dropping that back into the lower threes, someplace.
Based on lot size.
Based on lot size, because in the older section of town, most of your lots are a 50 by 150 or we've had some that are, I mean, even what they call substandard lots now. So, I mean, that is something that we've already started talking about in the building and zoning section going forward. These are all things that have kind of been on our minds for a little while. Some of the water situations have brought some of it to forebear to do these things. And I mean, the older section of town, unfortunately, throughout the years, the infrastructure is in need of repair. And the only thing that I can say is that unfortunately, the cost of those repairs at this point in time are astronomical. I mean, just to do a water main project down Lincoln, which is replacing a main that's been there since 1935, is approximately $1 million. And that's going through the existing structure without having to even dig up the street. We just had a water main break. Can you give me an idea what the cost was of that break just recently?
Are you talking about on Richmond?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just-
I don't know what the cost was. There was a lot of time, there was actually 3 water main breaks in 2 days. And, I don't know. I'd have to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just.
An estimate, but I mean, you're right,
you're
it's a
just-
valuable repair.
Jerry? To Mary's point about, and as we've been discussing, lot coverage, could you maybe talk about that a little bit and what impact we could expect to see by changing that, or if you feel that there's even a need? I'd kind of like to hear your take on it, because it is something we've been talking about for quite a while now.
And setbacks as well.
And setbacks, yes.
Right, well, I think I alluded to it a little bit. What we looked at was, what if there's a 10% build out to your current standard, the increase in detention that would be required, and this is over and, this is assuming that these are single lots, not 2 or 3 lots banding together and
Yeah.
building a subdivision, which would require detention, something that would not currently trigger the detention requirements. So if you're not subdividing, if you build out to that 10% of that, your storage requirements are going to jump about 25% for these areas. So there is a direct correlation. So what we can do is look at, can we get that to equilibrium for you so that at least you're not exacerbating the problem. So we can add that type of recommendation in the report.
Thank you.
I think another thing that we've done is different individuals and builders have come in for variations in sizes of their home, and I think we've become much more conscious about not granting those variations, and I think we'll continue to be more strict in following that direction in the future.
Definitely.
Anything else? Thank all of you for attending, and we will be getting back to everyone as many different ways as we can to notify them of when the next meeting is going to be, when we'll see the next step in the process of prioritizing all of these projects. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
We have a motion to adjourn.
Second. We don't have, I said we had one, I'm sorry.
I already said, would you entertain a motion to adjourn, but he didn't hear me.
So do we have one?
Yes.
Who said that? Oh, Emery.
So moved. Emery.
We have a motion and a second. Roll
Second
call.
by Scott.
I'm freezing.
Roll call.
Did you know if everybody leaves? the meeting
Trustee
goes
Emery.
adjourned?
Yes, say yes.
Yes.
Trustee Forsley.
Yes.
Trustee Scott.
Yes.
Trustee Fleming.
Yes.
Trustee Klebanow.
Yes.
Trustee Cindy.
Yes.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
You know what this is?